Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Over 4 years ago, I went to work at a warehouse in a small town that I'm from. I decided to leave after my health started to get worse physically, and I was diagnosed with panic disorder and severe anxiety after the situation that I'm about to tell you. This really changed the way that I developed friendships after that job, that's for certain. So, I started this job on April Fool's Day of 2018, which was odd to me, and I had no kind of high expectation of the job. All I wanted was to do my job, get paid, and then go home, as I had 2 children at home and many things that I could work on there. The job wasn't hard, and it made pretty good money for all the duties considered, so I couldn't really complain. I worked second shift for about 5 months, and then I went to day shift. While working on second shift, I kept to myself mostly, until one day, I met someone from one of the lines after we struck up a conversation about gaming. For the sake of anonymity, we'll name him JF. Well, JF was a pretty good guy, and we had a lot of things in common. I went home that night, and he popped up as a suggested friend on Facebook. Again, another oddity, so I decided to add him. When I did, we started talking more at work until he suggested that we should hang out, so we did hang out, pretty frequently even. We were friends for a month at this point, and one day, he decided that he was going to introduce me to his partner. She seemed decent at first, super nice, didn't seem to be a judgmental type, so I was cool with her. From then on, I would hang out with him when my kids were spending time with my mother. One time, we were talking at a restaurant, and he started to vent to me. "Dude, she's such a bitch sometimes. The other day, I forgot to take the trash out, and she threatened to stab me if I didn't. I've never been in a relationship where someone's threatened me, but she's got good intentions, dude." When he said that to me, I was concerned, but of course, we had only been friends for a month, so I thought that maybe he was being morbid jokingly, so I chuckled at him. He gave me a pretty serious look and said, "I'm not joking, she really did." And that concerned me. Fast forward about 8 months, and they're still together, and we all hang out pretty regularly, forgetting the things that he told me then. One day we were all talking, and he seemed a little off that day, so I asked him what was wrong in front of her. He flashed a smirk and said, "Nothing, dude. I'm just a little tired." He didn't have his eyes on me though. He had them on her when I asked that. When we went to work the next day, I asked him again, "Well, do you promise to keep this between us?" Of course, I agreed. He said that he was breaking up with her, and she went a little crazy. He said that she grabbed her gun and pointed it at him and said, "If I can't have you, then no one will." He said that he defused the situation and is trying to look for a way out. Not really knowing what to say, I just said, "You'll figure it out, man. If you need somewhere to go, then you can come stay with me until you get her out of the house." Fast forward to another year, he finally decided to leave her. But when he did, she flipped out again. This time, he told her over text. She said that she was going to find him and kill him, and he was actually out of work that day with a vacation day. He then sent me a text that said, Hey, let me know if she comes over to work looking for me. That struck me as odd because I had no idea of the situation that was unfolding. She actually did come to our job and she asked me where he was, and I said, I have no idea. I thought he was with you and you guys were out of town or something. And all she did was roll up her window and then drive off. I called him and I told him that she came by and he called the police about it. And they had found her up the road with a loaded gun in her car. 2 months later, he decided to talk to her again, and when he did, he had something to tell me. When he called me, he asked if I had seen her around and I hadn't. He said, I would take some vacation days if I were you. Dumbfounded, I asked him why, and he said to me, because she's out of jail and her cousins are in town trying to find the people that she has personal vendettas with, and you're one of them. At that point, I was terrified. I grabbed my kids and I went out of town. I took 2 weeks off of work, and come to find out, the next day, her and her cousins went to the next town over and shot 3 people in an apartment and killed them. I got the news about it the day after it happened, and the reason why he knew they were coming after me is because they made a Facebook Messenger group that he was included in and sent a list of names. Everyone regarded it as spam and decided to disregard the message, but he knew what it was. 3 of the names on that list were the people that they shot. The 4th name on the list was mine. After they found the evidence and he decided to go public about the group and the screenshots that he had, they were all charged with first-degree murder. From then on, I was very careful about who I would stick my neck out for, because even though he knew the context of that list and her intentions, he decided not to inform anyone else on it. Needless to say, we aren't friends anymore, and I dodged the bullet. So everyone, please stay safe. Several years ago, I worked at a crisis unit for the acutely mentally ill. It was a 10-bed unit where individuals would come to stay as a step down from a psychiatric hospitalization or a diversion to prevent psychiatric hospitalization, and I often worked alone on the weekends. One Friday evening, we received an admission. Michael. Background info was provided with a referral indicating a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder and a recent release from prison after serving a sentence for murder. I completed the initial intake meeting with Michael, and during which time he said some sexually explicit things to me. I made it clear that this was inappropriate and that confidentiality was limited in the staff working on the unit as part of his treatment team and would be privy to anything said in the interview or subsequent one-on-one sessions. He responded well to the redirection, and we finished the intake. And I went about the rest of my shift until about 11 p.m. that night when he approached the office and asked if I was working alone. Luckily at that time, I wasn't alone, and I told him that my male coworker was in the adjoining office. After this encounter, I explained the situation to my coworker, who read my shift summary, and decided to sit down with Michael and tell him the way he was acting was not acceptable, and he could risk being released from the program if it continued. The next morning I was working alone from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. and around 9 a.m. I went to wake up another client, Jeremy, to administer his medications. The room Jeremy was assigned was at the end of the hallway, and he was usually slow to get up in the mornings. While I was knocking on Jeremy's door, Michael approached me to tell me that he didn't appreciate that I had shared the things he said to me with my male coworker. I explained to Michael that he knew what he said was inappropriate and that he knew that anything he said to me would be shared with the rest of the treatment team. But Michael became more agitated and he got in my face, backing me into the corner in front of Jeremy's bedroom door. At this point, Jeremy had woken up and heard what was happening outside his room. Jeremy came out of his room, stood between Michael and myself, and told Michael that he needed to walk away and cool down. Michael went back to his room, and I contacted my supervisor, who then told me to document the encounter and then continue my shift. Well, needless to say, I left that job shortly after this incident. I am thankful for Jeremy that he had the presence of mind to intervene on my behalf, despite also being a client with a mental illness. I often wonder what would have happened if Jeremy didn't wake up, or if he would have been in a more severe state of mental illness and would have become agitated as well. So, Michael, let's never meet again. So I had a crazy ex that I didn't know was crazy back when we dated. In fact, he seemed pretty normal back then. Of course, he wasn't in the end, otherwise, there wouldn't be a story to tell here. I guess for a bit of a disclaimer or disclosure, this is a messed up story, as they all are. And if you aren't good with crazy people or really messed up situations, then I highly recommend that you stop reading here. I'll start by telling the story about myself and this person. My name is Amy, and his name is Maverick, but we all called him Mav. Mav and I met each other at a football game back in high school during freshman year. And then we hit it off pretty much right away. Back then, I was unfortunately and admittedly in the popular girls clique, and he was a bit of a goth/emo type, which is why it was odd that he and I got along so well from the first minute. Of all things, we actually bonded strongly over music. He had me listen to something by some screamo band, and I just fell in love with it. And from that day, we actually hung out frequently, and we became super close. My friends weren't into him because he was emo and dressed in all black, but I didn't really care and I liked him. So, we ended up actually dating near the end of that year. During summer break, we were together quite a bit. We spent time together at each other's houses. We met each other's parents, and honestly, it was one of those high school sweetheart situations where I think our parents were under the impression that we would stay together for a while. My dad actually liked him. He was respectful and polite, and while he may have looked all dark, he was, in my dad's words, the nicest boy that he had ever met. His parents seemed to like me too. I think they were surprised that he got me as a girlfriend, which I know sounds conceited, but we were polar opposites. Anyways, we spent all of the summer together. We went to the park, the movies, all the basic things that you do when you're dating someone in high school. During our sophomore year, unfortunately, Mav started hanging around the stoner kids that were seniors, and pretty quickly got pressured into becoming one of them. This was a deal breaker for me. We got into an argument, and I told him that if he was going to start down that road, then I wasn't going to be able to be with him. Well, he chose pot over me, so I broke it off. It sucked. I really like him. We got along well enough, and I had so many good times with him for the almost full year that we dated. But he wasn't willing to abandon his new vice for me, so that was that. We didn't really talk much after that, and I dated other guys. He dated other girls, and really, life just moved on from there. We kind of started talking again the last semester of our senior year, mostly because we had a photography class together and we worked on a few projects together. There was one point when we were working on a project together, and as I was leaving, he gave me a hug, then a quick peck on the cheek, and while it was a bit nostalgic at that time, I told him that there was nothing between us other than friendship. And while I really loved the time that we had together a couple of years back, there was no future for us. He looked upset, but he nodded and told me that he understood. Now, all this was basically to set up that we had a normal high school romance that ended with us just being friends. There was nothing else there, and I thought that was that. I was, apparently, wrong. After high school, he moved out of the state with his parents, and I stayed close to home. I went into nursing for college, and I then got a job. Basically, we were as far apart as we could have been, and the time we spent together was long forgotten. But then, out of nowhere, I got a friend request on Facebook from Maverick. I was actually pretty excited to talk to him since it had been about 8 years. So, I accepted and messaged him, and I asked him how things were. And I did what we all do. I stalked his profile a little bit, and I found out that he was married, and he was living in the next state over and working in information technology. He then messaged me back and was telling me all about his life after high school. I told him about my endeavors and all that I had done since then. I commented that I saw that you found someone and that she was gorgeous. I mean, she really was. And I told him that I was beyond ecstatic for the fact that things worked out for him. He then responded by asking me if I was with anyone, and he stated that he noticed that I was still going by my last maiden name. I informed him that I was not with anyone, that my last relationship ended a bit abruptly, but that I was pretty happy with my life, and I wasn't in any rush to get with anyone new. He then told me that he and his wife were actually moving back to our hometown because he had a job, and that he wanted to get together when he was here. I was a bit hesitant at first, but honestly, I was also excited to see him and catch up more. We agreed that when he moved back to town, we would hang out and get coffee or something and spend some time reminiscing about high school. The next day, I got a text from one of my friends mentioning that they got a friend request from Mav and that I should be careful, which was incredibly strange. I messaged her back and asked why I should be careful. She asked if I had forgotten how crazy he was, and I was completely taken aback. I had no clue what she was talking about, so I called her and I asked her to explain. She started talking to me about him and how he was absolutely obsessed with me back in high school. She said that I was the only thing that he ever talked about with his friends, and that he had pictures of me taped to his wall, and that his freaky obsession with me was the reason that he couldn't hold down the relationship. She then went on to tell me that one day in high school that he kissed me on the cheek and I turned him down. He had apparently told all of his friends that he was going to commit suicide because I wouldn't be with him. They had all talked him away from it, but he was adamant that his life was worthless if it was without me, and that he needed to be with me no matter what. She was surprised to hear that, and I honestly had no idea about any of this. I hadn't heard a word about it at all, and I was genuinely shocked. We ended a conversation with me saying that I would be careful around him, and then we left it at that. Obviously, I was a bit freaked out, but at the same time, he was married. He had a wife at this point, a career, and his own life. So while he may have been a bit obsessive back then, I didn't think that it would mean much at this point, right? He had clearly moved on, and there was nothing to worry about, right? Anyways, a couple weeks went by, and I got a call from Mav on a Saturday morning telling me that they were all moved in and that he really wanted to get with me that morning to talk. I didn't have plans, and while I didn't like that he was wanting to have coffee so quickly, mostly because it didn't bode well after finding out that he was creepily obsessed with me, I still agreed. I asked him if his lovely wife would be joining us, and he paused for a moment, then said that she was busy and wouldn't be able to make it. Oh boy, coffee alone with an ex that used to be overly obsessed with me. Sounded like a great time, really. Me being the optimist that I was, I honestly thought that he was just wanting to get together and have coffee and be friends, and that's really what I expected. He showed up and looked nothing like I had remembered him looking. Long gone were the trip pants and long black hair, and they were replaced by a closely shaved head, khakis, and a button-down shirt. I mentioned to him that he looked nice, and that it was a bit strange to see him wearing anything other than black. He laughed, and then he looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Do you really like it? If you don't, I can go change. I brought some of my clothes from high school that still fit me, just in case you wanted me to wear those." I chuckled, thinking that it was a joke, but he didn't change his expression at all. I immediately changed the subject and asked him about his wife and job. He quickly started dodging the questions and then started asking me about myself, what I've been up to since high school, had I been with many guys, which is way too personal. He also asked if I had any kids yet. Just a barrage of really strange and personal questions, including some that were incredibly inappropriate for coffee shop conversations. But then, out of nowhere, he asked if he could come back with me to my place. I was legit shocked by this. I shook my head and I said that I had apparently made a huge mistake thinking that he just wanted to chat and didn't want anything more out of this. I told him that his behavior was disgusting, and doubly so as a married man. I told him that I wouldn't go and tell his wife about how he had acted, but that he really needed to sit down with her and have a conversation about them and their future, because clearly he wasn't willing to remain faithful. He didn't like this. He seriously started screaming at me about how I ruined his life and how I was meant to be his. He was yelling at the top of his lungs, mind you, in the middle of a Starbucks, about how I needed to be with him and how he and I were soulmates, destined to be together for the rest of our lives. Long story a bit shorter on this one. They called the cops on him because of how aggressive he was getting with his screaming and berating. They showed up and he was still screaming. Then he turned his aggression on them. Thankfully, they had tasers and they dropped him without hesitation and then hauled him away. And while this was the last time he and I spoke, it wasn't the end of the situation. I actually got called down to the station the next day to talk to the police about what had happened. Honestly, I thought they were just going to have me confirm that he had made a scene and tell them what was going on with him. But no, there was a lot more to that. They did ask me what was going on, and they were asking if he and I were in a relationship or if we had made any sort of plans to be together. I laughed and I told them no, that we were old high school friends and that this was literally us getting together for coffee just to catch up. And then the bombshell. They said that after the whole event went down, they actually searched his car. They did so, and were allowed to do so because in plain view was a change of clothes covered in blood, a rather large knife also covered in blood, and various items that could be used to bind someone. They then said that they had spoken with him about the items in his car, and he was incredibly direct and honest with them. He told them that he had killed his wife, that he literally slit her throat and left her bleeding in their home, and he had left the murder weapon and the bloody clothing in his passenger seat. He told them that he and I met there because we were going to run away and start a new life together, and that I was in on it because I agreed to get with him. I thought, when he said he wanted us to get together, he meant as friends for coffee. He thought that I had agreed to spend the rest of my life on the run with him after he had murdered his wife. I spent a lot of time with the police, explaining my place in this. I showed them all of our texts and the Facebook messages. They asked about what we talked about when he had called me that morning. I explained that it was just him saying that we could meet that day. I feel like there was a bit of a suspicion on me because of what he was telling them, but they eventually were satisfied that I had nothing to do with it, and they decided to leave me alone. He, on the other hand, got charged with murder, and they decided to throw in a conspiracy to commit kidnapping charge because of the rope and duct tape he had, which tells me that they had enough reason to believe that he was going to take me forcefully. So, that's my story about my creepy ex Maverick that was also a homicidal maniac and was, unbeknownst to me, obsessed with me all throughout high school and apparently after. A final note, ladies, listen to your friends if they tell you someone is a creep and then tell you a bunch of things that you didn't know. And Mav, I hope you and I never, ever cross paths again, and I really hope that your wife is able to rest in peace, you disgusting bastard.
And here's the riddle for this video.
Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.